Voice technologies like Amazon Alexa and Google Home are being touted as the next big thing as companies are being encouraged to leverage voice technologies or miss out big time. Similar to how the smartphone changed how the world interacts with digital content, voice has already begun to transform how we search, engage, and shop in the digital world. As businesses start offering a service or a product in voice technology, what does all of that really mean? And where should a company even start? Is this really a viable technology for recruiters to engage or even find candidates? We're going to be discussing all that and more on the Speaker Agenda show right now. We have a first on the Speaker Agenda show, as I have two guests. My guests today are a husband-wife team that have literally written the book on developing voice strategy for organizations. They help companies use voice technology like Amazon Alexa and Google Home to grow market share by becoming discoverable and valuable to their audience. Please welcome to the show, Scott and Susan Westwater from Pragmatic Digital. All right. Guys, I am so excited to have you here. Please welcome my guests, Scott and Susan Westwater. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to be
Awesome.
here.
So usually I jump right into the deep end, but we're talking about voice technology, and a lot of recruiters don't really know, I mean, I'm sure they're probably familiar with Amazon Alexa and, Siri and Google Home and things like that. But let's back up. What are some what is voice technology to begin with, and what are some of the applications for it?
So voice is really this umbrella term that we use that is really all encompassing, and it could cover something like your smartphone. So if you have an iPhone or an Android device, you've got a voice assistant on there. You've also got, Comcast has their Xfinity remote with the one touch or one push access to be able to speak what you're looking for, and then it finds it for you. So it really is this class of devices that allows you to use your own natural language to control really any computing device. And so
basically it's voice recognition technology.
Yeah. And for the first time in human history, the way it's supposed to work is the computer has to learn how we operate versus us needing to learn how it operates. So it's really going to help a lot of people access information in whole new ways, and in whole different populations that haven't really been able to access information before.
So, Susan, why is voice technology such a big deal right now? Why is it really coming to a head?
I think there's a couple of reasons. The more immediate, although a longer play, is voice search. What we have seen in the beginning of this voice recognition aspect is that people have been using their voices to search. It's easier than typing. And so that has changed SEO, and it's going to change how even our search results look, because it's one answer in voice, not a big list of links. So that's the beginning of it. And then on the other side of it is there are all these other things that Scott started to touch on, such as the hands-free multitasking, just the ability and ease of not having a literacy requirement. So there's a lot more applications that will become much more accessible when we start to even add multilingual and different levels of ability. It becomes even more inclusive.
All right, you just gave me a bit of a heart attack there. So, and I already kind of know this. So if I ask Alexa a question, it only gives me one answer, right? I mean, If I do a search engine search, type in a bunch of stuff into Google, I get pages and pages worth. How do I know that the result is that going to be? I mean, the relevancy has to be really good for me to trust Alexa or Google Home, or even Siri sucks. But I mean, it's got to be dead on target, right?
Yeah.
Sure. Well, and there's a way that it works. So you start initially, we liken it to the rings of a tree. So when Alexa or even Google Assistant, there are some nuances, but when Alexa starts to search, first it looks within its own databases. So like if you're asking about the weather or some very simple basic inquiries, that's going to look within itself and its database and its abilities. Then it's going to go to the second ring, which we call the voice web. And this is where the rubber's really hitting the road with voice technology. And this is then where looking, if it doesn't have this information in its database, it's going to start looking at these voice skills, audio content, all of those pieces. And this is where the nuances, the differences between Alexa and Google Assistant come into play, because Alexa will start to look to a certain, basically within its skill store, and go from there and the content within that, while Google Assistant will look at podcasts and even potentially frequently asked question pages. And then if there is no answer, it's at that moment that Alexa will use Bing, the Google Assistant will use Google, and then it goes out to the web and the World Wide Web and gets that data.
Here's a Wikipedia article. Here's a Wikipedia
Absolutely.
article.
And that's the thing, is that then it goes into then either Wikipedia or Yelp, because of the consistency of that data, of how it's marked up to go from text to speech. And also because there isn't a lot of content out there yet that's been optimized for it to find it. Trust me, there's nothing better than unseating that Wikipedia page. A fun thing we actually like to do is to go and tell someone, hey, here's a major brand, like say Coca-Cola. Go look it up and ask Alexa about it. And when you get a Wikipedia page for a brand that has had hundreds of millions of dollars put behind what it is, that's a big reality check about how few tomes of content are out there and how the opportunity is. Because if you're in that voice web, it's never even going to go to the World Wide Web. So that's an important aspect to it.
So there potentially could be a huge uptick in search results and things like that for first movers to voice technology.
Yeah, and it's really incumbent.
The space is empty right now, right? So somebody's got to fill that void.
Yeah, and so if anything is showing up, it's probably the featured snippets or the knowledge graph. Sometimes it's the first result, and it really depends on what platform you're using and what actually gets returned. But over time, especially on the Amazon side, if you've actually created voice content in their skill store, it's ranking factors, just like SEO. So are people updating this skill regularly? Are people using it? Are they coming back to it? Is it relevant? And so there's a lot of criteria. So those are some of the ones we know. There's a lot we don't know, just like, with the magic box of Google. But over time, as people use your skill, let's say, and you're providing the answers for recruitment or HR or whatever, over time, when someone asks a direct question to Alexa, your answer could be the one that surfaces. And so it's really,
you become a trusted voice content provider.
Correct.
Just like in, Google is scoring websites, right? In S1, S10, whatever. They're trusted. They're not going to, gather and spam you and all that stuff. I'm sure the stuff is going to evolve to the point in voice technology where you're going to get a score, whether you like it or not, for your Alexa skill or your Google Home skill.
Right. And if you're not in that position one, forget about it.
This is like the internet back in 1995.
It's all over again.
Yep.
Yeah,
all over again.
Like HTML came on board. I remember going to my first HTML page in 1995, and I was like, I could not conceptually. Nothing had really been there before, right? I had no frame of reference. Now I have a frame of reference. So it's interesting. Why do you think that voice technology has taken over the household? I mean, 55% of U.S. households have an Alexa device right now. So, I mean, that's huge penetration.
It's really interesting. I think they're less expensive devices. And so, you can get them right now, or at least on Cyber Monday, Black Friday, $22 for an Echo Dot.
Oh, wow.
So you're talking about practically no cost to entry. And so I think a lot of people are getting them. There's a curiosity, and then they start using it a little bit, and they go, wow, this would be really helpful to have in the bathroom when I'm getting ready in the morning, let's say, or, in my child's room to go through and read bedtime stories. And so you see a lot of kind of this rabbiting effect where you start with one device and then all of a sudden you have 3 devices and then all of a sudden you have 9 devices. Or if you're in our house, maybe even more.
You have more than 9 devices in your house? Come on.
Well, so we've got both the Alexa and the Google platform in most of our rooms. And then we have a HomePod as well. I mean, this is what we do. So we want to really bang on it and see what we can do to it. But I think that's a big factor in it. So it's also this idea of easy access to information. One of the cool things about this adoption is it's not just the young groups that are adopting it. We actually see, cohorts of 65 and over that are adopting this technology, and it's because it allows them to, especially if they're living alone, it actually gives them the ability to stay connected.
Okay, boomer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so like we know a lot of people that are aging in place a lot longer. And there are studies that show that Alexa helps with depression and loneliness and mental health. So we're seeing that population adopting the technology a lot faster than they have in the past. And it's pretty even across the board. Sure, the millennials are leading the pack when you look at the breakdowns, but it's pretty even overall. And so when you look at the adoption here, it's actually the fastest adopted technology in human history. It's faster than televisions.
I saw some of the numbers. It's going from the original projections were like 111 million, and it's projected up to 121 million. They've revised estimates, and then next year, 2021, 120 or 130 or 140 million. Is that right?
Yeah, it depends on
the week.
Yeah, depends on the report and the week and all that stuff. It's basically accepted that it's anywhere between 50 and 60%. Microsoft has a report where it says it'll be closer to 75% of US homes will have at least one device. And so, that's a bit of crystal ball, but we do know, especially with the holiday season now well underway, there's a lot of people that are buying these devices. I saw a stat that Alexa devices outsold any other electronics on Amazon 2-1 this past weekend. And so a lot of people are buying these devices. And the interesting thing is there's not the quote unquote killer app yet, which is what I think a lot of businesses are looking for to go, okay, now people are starting to adopt these things. We need to invest. People are investing without actually having like the quote unquote killer app.
Right. I'm wondering, some people are concerned about privacy. These things are listening devices, when are they on, when are they off? But as far as I've seen, I mean, people are willing to relinquish privacy for the sake of convenience, right? Are you guys seeing that also? Or are you seeing what kind of privacy concerns?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing we have to do, actually, as technologists in general, is the whole privacy conversation. We shouldn't limit it just to voice. Your phone right now, Google probably already knows a lot more about you than you might realize, long before you put that assistant in your home. And I think that we do see that. We do see that when you offer up convenience, you do see that trade-off of, okay, I am the product. I'm willing to give up certain bits of privacy and understanding it. I think some of the other challenges that come with it is understanding how the technology learns and improves upon itself. When it comes to natural language processing, the best source of information and reference for the systems to learn is humans. Humans speak in a certain way and things along those lines. You can try to account for every accent under the sun, but in the reality is unless we start to have humans involved, it gets very difficult to get that accuracy to where it needs to be. In order to do that, that requires input, and that's where that comes into play. And I don't think that necessarily gets explained as much, that is anonymous information, that it isn't tied to a user. But in reality, the whole conversation about privacy is something that should be taken across your whole digital footprint, not just your voice footprint.
Yeah, I was just involved in a little bit of a discussion on a Facebook group about this voice technology stuff. And one of the people, and I believe they said this erroneously, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they're like, okay, these things are recording devices. I get that. They're recording whether you initiate the command or not. So if I don't say Alexa, they're recording in the background 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they're recording even if they're turned off. Is that accurate?
No,
Yeah,
they don't. Yeah, it's listening for the wake word that's localized. If it's turned off and you see the red glow, it is not picking up anything from there. It isn't just this creepy spy that's constantly.
Yeah, well, this person's contention was even your cell phone, when it's powered down, has the ability to record all your conversations. It's like, come on. there's no way it can do that. There's no power going to the chips. You need power. You need batteries. If that was the case, you wouldn't need to recharge it every night, right?
Right.
Right.
Well, and it's just interesting because I think there is some misinformation out there as far as how the technology operates. And yeah, it does have to listen, at least to know when you're making a request of it. So right now, it's just passively listening on its own end for the wake word, which I won't say because I have two on my desk and don't want them to interrupt the interview.
Yes.
And then what it does is once it hears the wake word, then it records your command, sends it back to the computer, processes it, and then gives you your result back. And so in a really high level nutshell, that's how it operates, but it's not recording, tomes and tomes of data that gets passed back to the server every single time you say anything. Quite frankly, if that was the case, I think the cat would be out of the bag and no one would have these devices at home. So.
Yeah. That's also an incredible amount of storage.
Depends
when
on
you
how much
think about
convenient.
it.
Again, I think people are willing to give up privacy over convenience.
And we've seen that
yes.
time and time again.
Yeah.
Yes.
You were saying
that's where-
something, Susan?
Yeah, and that's where it's important to be useful and usable then. What I was saying earlier is if it was recording all of that information, when we look at the volume of the pieces, I don't think Amazon or Google makes enough money to offset that kind of storage limit that would come with all of that information.
Yeah,
And
I mean, you're not talking, what's after petabyte, right?
yeah, absolutely.
I don't even know. It's probably a Google byte, right? So
There's probably
Right.
some quantum computer somewhere in the world, probably at Google, that could handle it. But I mean, generally speaking, it's just not in these companies' best interests to really have these fears become realized.
Yeah.
And we also know a lot of people at Amazon and at Google who are actively working on this, and privacy is a big concern of theirs. And so they're trying to build, ethical platforms because they
Yes.
know one false step and this whole thing is going to blow up in their face. So they're really cognizant of that.
We've learned a lot from what you were talking earlier about, you remember HTML and the days of the web. There's a lot of things that we're smarter about the evolution of this technology because we saw how mobile, how web, how social, how all of those things have evolved. So there is a bit more of that. We ask the what if questions a lot sooner, only because we know better. I mean,
Right.
Back in the 90s, we didn't know better, or when we were asking for people to fill out forms in the early 2000s. Now we're a lot more aware of hey, we need to think about all of the consequences, not just the incredibly positive ones.
security and everything up and down
Absolutely.
the food chain. Let's pivot a little bit. So we kind of jumped way down my list of questions here. I'm going to back up to like question number 4 or 5. But a company has a marketing strategy. You kind of mentioned Coca-Cola. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars. But if you ask Alexa, tell me about Coca-Cola, it defaults to a Wikipedia page, right? So, what kind of things should you be incorporated into a voice technology strategy since we're so early in the adoption phase?
There's a couple. You can start by optimizing for long tail keywords, keyword phrases. Starting to actually work within optimizing your content as it is. I think only 1/3 of all websites are optimized for featured snippets as well as the long tail keywords. That's your first step. And that's just important housekeeping anyways, because that's how it works with screen readers and a lot of other aspects to it. Then the other aspect to it is getting your information out there. You have to have your Wikipedia page updated, because if that's what's showing up, you need to make sure that's right. And then it comes into start creating that audio content, start owning that, because within a skill or an action or any of those experiences, that is the most guaranteed way to control the narrative or to control those pieces. The important flip side of that is because this is based on a stronger, like probably the most strong pull type of strategy ever, because it's when someone asks for it. It can't just be a monologue or you picking up everything. It does have to have that conversational and also that user-centric aspect to it.
So it's got to be usable, first of all, right?
Yep.
It's got to be discoverable, and it has to be, provide value just like everything else.
And I think it's going to be amplified here because if you go out and take the more traditional marketing approach where you're just talking at people and not providing them with information that they're actually asking for, A, no one's ever going to look at it, and B, they're never going to find the right answer. And so
Mhm.
you're actually doing yourself a disservice by just taking the more traditional approach where you're just kind of droning on about yourself. What you should do is actually understand what your audience is looking for and how you could provide value, around your product that
Mhm.
answers the questions that they have. So it could be very top of funnel, it could be purchase, it could be, customer support type things. But overall, you want to understand what needs do they have along the journey and how you can actually answer questions to be valuable to them.
So I know that so far during this conversation, we've been mostly speaking about companies and marketing and how they can get their skills on there, et cetera. But how could a recruiting firm or a staffing department, talent acquisition team use Alexa or Google Home or any of these voice technologies? What are
There's
some of the use
actually
cases, if you will?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few. You could use it for employment branding and get your message out there because a lot of people, I've done a lot of corporate websites, and the dirty secret, if you will, of corporate websites is 85% of the traffic always goes to the job section. And so while you
Mhm.
have this huge website with about us and leadership and all that stuff, most people are really concerned about the job section. And so it's about what jobs do you have? What's the culture of the company? What are your
Yeah.
core values? What do you believe in? What's it like to work there? Things like that. Those are all questions that you could easily create audio content for. And it either could come from the head of recruitment or the head of HR or whoever you decide to actually be the voice of your recruitment brand. But they could actually be the ones providing answers to their talent. So you don't have to have what questions do you have for me during the conversation? A lot of that information can actually come
Mhm.
through even stronger. The great thing about doing
It's kind of interesting that you mentioned employer brand videos and things like that because I just did a couple episodes with some employer branding experts, and one of the things that they said was that employer brand videos are the least watched videos of all videos of content across the internet. So if you look at the employer brand videos, less than 3% of them actually get viewed on an employer website. I'm wondering if um, providing it in an audio format might be more consumable.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
and it has to be based on what they're looking for. So, based on analytics patterns and other research that I've done for those types of sites, we know that those are the types of information people are looking for. So maybe they're not watching a video because they assume it's just going to be, company propaganda or marketing or
Mhm.
whatever. But if it truly provides the answers to the questions that they have, I think that's really the holy grail that you could be
Yep.
looking for. And then beyond that, there's the ability to provide links to apply for jobs. There's the ability to have podcast content even. And so we don't look at it as just voice technology on Alexa. It could be kind of your entire audio ecosystem, if you will. And so you could start with a podcast that takes people into your Alexa experience, and then it could actually push them to apply for a job.
Hmm.
So I think, overall, you would need to figure out what is your strategy and what are you trying to achieve from a business
Mhm.
standpoint, and then look at what the audience needs are and figure out kind of where those intersect. And wherever those intersect is really, really where you're going to want to focus your first effort because it's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck.
So define your specific outcome that you're looking for,
Yep.
and then figure out how voice can get you to that outcome.
Yeah, and
Yep.
that's really a lot of the work that we
Mhm.
do. We work with companies to figure out what they're trying to achieve with voice because, if you don't have a very purposeful reason behind it or a strategy behind it, it's going to become another shiny object. Not a lot of people are going to use it. So, what are they trying to achieve? What do they define success as? And then, from an audience standpoint, what are the information needs that we can help them with? And really just look at marrying the two together.
So where inside of an organization does this kind of sit or get fit, right? So is it within a social media content team? Is it a marketing team? Is it IT because it's technology based? Where
Yeah.
is a company going to put this?
I think it depends on who your champion is and what your purpose is. We've talked with customer support groups because they're looking for ways of making the easy questions, so to speak, that they would get called into, having that available 24/7 instead of only when their call center is available. We've talked to marketing teams and helped them get their brand and manage I own a category, or how do I start to get that credibility? And then there's even the aspect that we've talked about from an internal HR perspective, where if you want to find out publicly known information, like what holidays are off, or essentially what's my IT support's number so that I can call them, or things like that. All those emails that get ignored all the time, unfortunately, because when you come back from a weekend, they're all there. This is an opportunity to make it easier for someone to get to that versus sifting through a SharePoint site.
Or,
So
Alexa, I need help building this IKEA chair. Give me the directions.
Yeah. And actually, if you had a screen version, that would be like the ideal use case, because not only can you say I'm on step 4, what is the instructions, it would have the visual there as well.
Yep.
And so there's certainly times where voice only or audio only experiences are going to make sense. There's other times you're going to actually need to have that screen feedback. But
so right now they're pushing it to it's called the Alexa Show, right? Google doesn't have a video version, right? Or a tablet
version. They do. It's I believe it's called the Nest Hub.
Yes.
They actually just went through this whole rebranding thing with Nest. But so I think that's what they actually call their main big screen device. I don't know if they have any. I don't know if they have any smaller screen devices. And then on the Amazon side, it's the Show series. Yeah.
All right. But that's still a fairly small little thing. It's only about the size, smaller than a bread box. Right?
We've got the Show 5, and it is, a little bit like an alarm clock size. Yeah. The other one is actually, I believe, an 8-inch screen, so it's pretty, it's a decent size. It's not like a laptop screen or anything like that, but decent enough.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you, at some point in time, you'll be able to port it over to, like, hey, send this to my TV, or send this to.
That is definitely, cool. We've heard that is on the roadmap of using the available screens.
And if not that, having Alexa or Google Assistant built right into the TV, so you don't have to have a separate device.
All right, so you've convinced me. I'm going to be putting my podcast on Alexa. I got to create an Alexa skill. There's also some, daily briefings or daily updates, right?
Yeah.
Where do I even start? I'm completely lost. So.
Well, I mean, it really depends on, again, what you're trying to achieve. There are third-party software platforms that exist where you could, create a basic question and answer skill. You can also use it to record flash briefings either on your phone or through a more professional setup, and then upload your audio files. I think for one thing for people to know right now is there's 2 different ways of getting content on there. You can either use the Alexa voice, which are referred to poly voices, or you can actually record your own voice and upload MP3 files.
And that's where Alexa is just doing voice technology. She's just reading the text on the page,
Correct.
right?
Exactly.
There are some, and there are some different voices. It isn't just the default female voice There's a whole range that are available. And if you're working with some of these third-party platforms, you can just check a box and hear them all. And it ranges from accented males all the way through, again, just to the default Alexa piece.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of options.
Tailor it to your audience, right?
Yep, absolutely. It depends on your audience or even your brand of how do I want to think about it this way. Maybe I'm not going to make the investment of having a particular voice over a person who's consistently there. So maybe I'll use the poly voice to make that work. And so you have the opportunity. And then if you do have any type of savviness, there are like Alexa blueprints. Samsung actually has also a developer outreach. It's all under developer outreach is what it's categorized as. Google does as well. And there are some, I think I will say Amazon has the most simple ways of Divine where you have these blueprints, templates you can work within. If you have that level of savviness. What's nice about some of these other platforms, though, is that a lot of them have already started sorting out how do I make that work on Google? How do I make that work on Alexa? So you wouldn't have to go and figure out how Alexa stuff gets put on and then figure out for Google, because a lot of times those two audiences, it's hard to suss out who's on what side. And so it's always better to try to get as many of those platform devices as possible across, especially with Samsung's Bixby coming out. And I think it's going to be coming out pretty big next year.
Samsung Bixby. That's
yes.
What it's called? Okay.
Yeah, there's going to be a
mixed up that. I mean, people get mixed up with Alexa all the time, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's a fairly common name here in the United States. But it's kind of interesting. I thought it was going to be pretty difficult to create an Alexa skill or put my podcast on a briefing. I literally did it in like less than 10 minutes. It was pretty simple, right? So you just push over your RSS feed, and as long as it was a secure RSS feed, it worked. I still have some
and I mean, there's
tweaking my
definitely
fingers
varying
to format it
levels.
properly, but I got to get that done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely varying levels of complexity. So you can do anything from something like that to kind of these framework tools that we're talking about, where you can push audio into it, and it basically acts like a CMS, content management system, and then pushes it to platforms. Or you can do all your own custom development. So it really just depends on how complex the solution needs to be. But I think for businesses, the price to entry isn't super high. So you can get some basic stuff going relatively inexpensively and start to get feedback from your audience, which is great.
Yeah. The reality is it's very easy to create a voice experience. The hard part is making a good one.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's where the challenge comes in. But as far as getting entered into the space, that isn't nearly as challenging as I think when we think about web development way back when, that was a lot harder. Yeah. There's been a lot more thought put into how do we make this more accessible.
Awesome. All right, guys, I've got audience members. I've got 3 different resources for you. Scott and Susan, stick around because we still have the after hours show. But the first resource is Scott and Susan have written a little ebook. It's like 6 or 7 pages long. It's a PDF download. I'm going to put a link to that in the description. But basically, it's what every smart marketer needs to know about voice technology so you can deliver better customer experience. This is a great little 6-page beginner guide, if you will. I read through it in like 15 minutes, and literally I was able to go onto Alexa and start setting this stuff up. They also have a book that just came out called Voice Strategy, Creating Useful and Usable Voice Experiences. I read through that. I'm going to be referencing that like every 15 minutes while I develop my stuff and my strategy. I've got some time set aside on my calendar over Christmas break to make sure that I'm building out my voice technology strategy for the podcast and other aspects. So thank you guys. I'll put a link to your book on the podcast. And then lastly, well, first of all, I read through it and in about an hour or so, and I'm going back through the book to actually develop some of the strategy and pushing out the podcast through Alexa. This book was my secret shortcut to solving all those questions that I had, like why should I be doing this in the first place, right? So thank you so much for providing that resource to the audience. And then the last one is the best resource that I found is having a conversation with Susan and Scott directly, right? And they've offered to the audience that if you want to schedule some time, I'm going to put a link right to their calendar in the description. So you guys will have 15-minute conversations with anybody that wants to discuss voice technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So stick around. We're going to end this show, mate. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for having us.
This is awesome.
You're welcome.